Welcome to the PAVE project, where 13 teams seek to understand the role of communities in the dynamics of radicalization, but also the role played by communities in building more resilient societies against violent extremism. We conduct empirical work in the MENA region and the Western Balkans in a comparative fashion, while also looking for cross-regional dynamics with Europe.
When it comes to examining the push and pull factors of radicalization and violent extremism, scholars have predominantly adopted either the macro level perspective, such as studying the structural drivers, or a micro level perspective, such as profiling the radicalized individuals, while they have paid little attention so far to the meso-level perspective of the socio-political dynamics behind the phenomenon of violent extremism. These dynamics and these socio-political dynamics are either impacting or impacted by violent extremism.
What I think is unique about PAVE in relation to Western Balkans in particular is that most research up to date has focused on Islam only, in particular in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and ignored other extremism. And in PAVE, we are not just going to focus in Bosnia on Salafism, Wahhabism, etc., but we're going to go beyond that, and we're going to look at the far right. And also we're going to look at other extremisms that are relevant for that area, in particular in relation to Christianity. And we're talking about both the Orthodox Church and Catholic Church here. So we're just going to look at kind of historical legacies of these different extremisms. Also, another thing that it's very important to stress is that majority of research up to date has also ignored direct impact of the conflict on current violent extremism in the region. So the wars that has happened in the 1990s. And PAVE is going to do that. It's going to look at the direct impact of these conflicts by focusing on cumulative and overlapping extremism and exploring those.
PAVE looks at the community level by considering the change from inside. At this community level, we focus on the system, institutions, civil society, and actors, and interactions among them to change political and social conditions. It recognized the resilience, capacities, skills, and resources of persons by building protection and solutions and supporting the community's own goals.
It's important to keep an eye on the community level for two major reasons. First, it allows us to have a bottom-up approach to reaching a first-hand understanding of the community needs. Secondly, this helps in formulating what to be suggested in terms of preventive and amending political and institutional measures.
In order to fully understand drivers of violent extremism and at the same time identify factors of resilience, it is important to focus on community level, because it is at the community level where some of the most closer social interactions take place. Communities are often the first ones to notice when extremist narratives or extremist groups have penetrated society, because they are directly affected by radicalization, whether in the form of changing norms or challenges to existing power and influence structures. So looking at the community level allows us to understand what gives individuals of a certain community a sense of purpose, what challenges they face, their grievances, where do they turn to when they find themselves in difficulty. But the purpose of the PAVE projects and some one of the value added that the project brings is that it will not only focus on what communities are more vulnerable, but also what makes certain communities more resilient to violent extremism.
Participatory approach involves two meanings, actually. The research contribution of several district geographical zones, each one with specific radicalization troubles, on the one hand. On the other hand, the implication of the populations concerned with radicalization in solving these problems, because they know, these populations know better than any observer, anyone, how best to remedy institutional deficiencies.
Every community has its ways of understanding issues such as radicalization. PAVE attempts to involve people from different communities by listening and understanding their side of story and engaging them directly or through their community leaders.
So for PAVE, the participatory approach is really important. That means slightly different things for different partners within the consortium. But for us, that also entails working together with and thinking together with local partners to think about how their programs addressing violent extremisms can be measured in a meaningful manner. And in particular, we are thinking about using and developing the approach of randomized controlled trials, a methodology that has not been used so much in the study of violent extremism and approaches to violent extremism. And we hope this will lay the basis for an honest learning process where local partners and scholars together try to study the impact of various programs.
We are very lucky that all our researchers in PAVE projects are from local communities. This is something that we planned from the beginning. It is not European Western researchers with no knowledge about local communities going in the field and conducting research, but it's actually giving into the expertise of the local knowledge, respecting that local knowledge, respecting that tacit knowledge that researchers there have of really understanding their countries, their histories, their languages, their nuances of polarizations, which is particularly relevant in our context, etc.
The aim is to generate concrete and common policy strategies.
Based on critical and in-depth research, the project will develop practical, inclusive, and context-specific tools to strengthen the capacity of policymakers and local leaders to prevent radicalization and its subsequent impacts.
The most essential output for PAVE for me is of course the knowledge we're going to generate because it really is a knowledge gap in what role communities plays in the dynamic of radicalization, but also, and more importantly maybe, what makes communities more resilient? What are the factors that support them in remaining resilient to violent extremism? And that knowledge has real practical value for policy stakeholders on the one hand, but especially for the communities we also try to serve with this research. For knowledge in the end isn't only about knowing more, it's to understand what is the right thing to do, what needs to be done more of, and how to do it better, and maybe also what not to do. And that, I think, is the aspiration I have for PAVE, at least, that the knowledge we are generating and the way we're doing it inclusively will be able to support real change.